I guess what this all comes to is the importance, really underlying the importance of teacher education, both initial teacher education and in-service teacher education, or teacher learning, professional learning. And to me, until we get to the stage where initial teacher education is really embedded, that CLIL is embedded, or CLIL approaches, integrated learning approaches, immersion approaches, to a certain extent it doesn't really matter what the label is, but until in initial teacher education we enable young entrants to the profession to have an understanding of how language can really support learning and be used not only as a means of learning the language but learning how to use the language, then it will be very limited in scope. This is already happening, but it has a long way to go. Also, it's around looking at language competence and enabling people in training to develop their linguistic skills, because really I've referred already to the fact that you do need competence obviously in the language, but what you also need is confidence that you're using it appropriately. In terms of professional learning and professional development, this is absolutely key. And again, it's about building confidence, but also an understanding of how language needs to be analysed according to the kind of learning that's going on and linked really, really closely. So in a way, that brings us to higher education. And it also really, really begins to emphasise the need for an understanding of literacies and how they impact on the nature of the theme, the topic, the subject, the discipline which is being used. So, for example, if we're looking generally at how to in a language, how to write a report, how to argue or discuss, that's already a grounding, that's fine. But until it is linked to real content, authentic content that is part of either the subject discipline or the discourse that is normalized around the topic area and so on, it will not have the same depth of meaning, and it certainly will not contribute to the quality of learning. This is really, really important, and I can't stress enough the need for teachers in their planning to start to look at the kind of concepts that are going to be taught, and then to analyse what kind of language is needed to enable the concepts to be understood at an increasingly deeper and more sophisticated level. This brings us into really highlighting and understanding the link between concept formation and language. And part of that link, a good starting point there, is to look at language functions that are often in systemic functional linguistics are often called cognitive discourse functions. They are key because they're the ones that are the bridge between learning content as a set of information and knowledge, which of course it never is, because content is all around meaning making and concept formation. But it's also linking it to the language and making the language meaningful. That is not what has been done. Years ago, language across the curriculum, I'm going back to the 80s now, when language across the curriculum was big. This had nothing to do, in essence, with CLIL, and CLIL was really not really around at the time, but it was looking at how we need, in schools and universities, to make our learners absolutely aware of the kind of language that is needed to express increasingly more complex concepts and to develop our understanding in meaningful ways. I said earlier on that I'd come back to languaging, and this of course is where we have to enable the learners to talk about what they think they've understood in their own words. And this is as important in kindergarten as it is in tertiary levels, even with PhD students and so on, because unless we can put into our own words what we think we've understood, then we don't know whether we've understood it. And the more that you do that, the more you share that with other people, but you also, the cognitive functioning that is going on inside is also helping that understanding. The big question then is, how do you acquire that kind of language to do it? Well, it's through practice, it's through the kind of tasks, sequencing of tasks, the social nature of learning that has to be embedded in what we do. In terms of higher education and what we need to look at in higher education, to be quite honest with you, I think it's the same as it is all the way through. But by the time we reach higher education, there's often an assumption that the students by that stage will have acquired all they need to know, or they'll have a very good level or high level of language. Two things. First of all, that might simply not be the case, or students might appear to have a good command of the language, and often I have to say in higher education the CLIL language, apart from in Anglophone countries, is English. They might appear to have good English skills, good communicative skills, but when you really look at the kind of academic discourse skills that they need, they might not have access to them. And it's around, in higher education, it's about the teacher making those visible, really getting text, and text is crucial, really getting text to be analysed, not only just simply for meaning, but also in the ways that the meaning is expressed in that particular subject area. So I do think it's the difference between sort of academic discourse at a very general level being much more applied and much more nuanced in terms of the subject areas at university level, which is critical if from a higher level view, whether it's for first degrees or higher degrees, that doesn't really make a difference, because by that stage the student, the learner, the individual has to be able to express themselves appropriately according to the academic discipline or the range of disciplines. I mean, all of this is becoming very much, the boundaries between disciplines are becoming much more fluid as interdisciplinarity in universities across the piece is becoming more established.